The air was thick with the stench of burning flesh and rotting corpses. Smoke curled lazily over charred fields where thousands had perished. In the distance, the sun bled red as it sank beneath the horizon, casting its dying light upon a world ruled by cruelty. You could hear it, the distant screams carried on the wind, the cries of those who had fallen into the clutches of machines built for one purpose alone: to tear apart the human body, piece by agonizing piece. These were not weapons of war, but tools of terror, devices forged in dark workshops by hands as merciless as the rulers who commissioned them. Instruments of pain, designed to break men's spirits before their bodies gave out. And in this documentary, we will journey into the black heart of history's most nightmarish inventions: torture devices, so horrific that even today their names provoke shudders. Steel, wood, fire, rope, and iron combined in ways that turned justice into agony and punishment into spectacle. Brace yourself, for what you are about to hear is not for the faint of heart. To understand these engines of suffering, we must first step into the shadows of the past. We must travel to the crumbling courts, the plague-ridden streets, and the blood-soaked battlefields of medieval Europe and beyond. A world where power was absolute, where kings ruled by divine right, and where dissent was crushed with brutal efficiency. In these unforgiving centuries, torture was not just punishment, it was policy. It was a language of fear spoken fluently by inquisitors, monarchs, and executioners alike. Picture Europe in the late Middle Ages. The Roman Empire's long shadow had faded, leaving behind fractured kingdoms and fiefdoms locked in endless wars. The Church wielded enormous power, and with that power came an obsession with rooting out heresy, witchcraft, and rebellion. Justice was swift and merciless. There were no human rights, no appeals, no mercy. A whisper of treason, a murmur of blasphemy, and you could find yourself dragged from your home at dawn, your fate sealed by devices engineered to extract the ultimate price: your pain. This was an age of iron and blood. Monarchs like England's Henry VIII and Spain's Ferdinand and Isabella ruled with iron fists, while inquisitors scoured the land for signs of the devil's work. Torture was their tool of choice, a weapon against the soul. And behind every dungeon door, in every cold, damp chamber lit by flickering torchlight, some of the most sadistic inventions ever conceived awaited their victims. Our journey begins not with a single device, but with the world that birthed them, a world where life was cheap and suffering was spectacle. Consider the political climate of 13th century France. The Albigensian Crusade was in full swing, a brutal campaign launched by the Catholic Church to wipe out the Cathar heresy. Entire towns were slaughtered, their inhabitants burned or impaled, while those unlucky enough to survive were subjected to devices like the rack, the strappado, and the iron boot, each designed to turn the human body against itself. In Spain, the Inquisition had begun its reign of terror. Suspected heretics were dragged before tribunals and condemned without evidence, their confessions wrenched from their lips by relentless torment. Torture chambers beneath cathedrals and castles echoed with the sounds of breaking bones, tearing flesh, and the screams of the damned. And in Italy, the city-states waged their private wars of vengeance and domination, employing torturers as both enforcers and entertainers. But it wasn't only the church or the crown that employed such methods. Feudal lords, seeking to maintain their fragile grip on power, used torture devices to quell peasant uprisings and crush rival factions. In the German states, the Holy Roman Empire's fractured principalities became breeding grounds for ever more diabolical contraptions. It was in this crucible of violence and paranoia that the most infamous torture devices were born. Let us pause and reflect on the sheer ingenuity and horror of these tools. The men who designed them were craftsmen, smiths, and engineers. But where others saw beauty in form and function, these men saw opportunity in agony. They understood the anatomy of pain, where to apply pressure, where to cut, to burn, to rip. Their creations were masterpieces of misery, each one honed through trial and error until it achieved its singular purpose: to break the human body in the most excruciating ways imaginable. As we journey through these tales, you will meet devices that seem the stuff of nightmares: the Iron Maiden, a sarcophagus lined with hidden spikes; the breaking wheel, on which victims were bludgeoned and shattered, their limbs woven through the spokes; the brazen bull, a hollow brass sculpture in which the condemned were roasted alive, their screams transformed into the roar of a beast. Each of these represents not just a tool of punishment, but a dark reflection of the age that produced it, a time when cruelty was codified and pain was power. The psychological impact of these devices was as devastating as the physical. In many cases, the mere sight of a torture instrument was enough to force a confession, true or false. The inquisitors and executioners knew this, and they wielded terror like a blade. Public displays of torture served as warnings to the masses. Defy the law, defy the church, defy the crown, and this is what awaits you. It was a brutal calculus, one that kept populations in line through fear alone. But beyond the terror, beyond the screams, there is something else. These devices reveal a chilling window into the human soul. For every torture device tells two stories, the story of the victim and the story of the executioner. Who were the men who designed and operated these machines? What drove them? Duty, fanaticism, or something darker still, a twisted pleasure in the suffering of others? And what of the crowds who gathered to watch? Were they horrified or entertained? Perhaps both. These questions will haunt us as we delve deeper into history's darkest corners. In this documentary, we will explore 5 of the most feared torture devices ever created. We will trace their origins, their use, and their lasting legacy. We will meet the rulers who sanctioned their use and the victims who endured their wrath. And we will see how, even centuries later, these instruments of torment continue to cast long shadows over our collective memory. So steel yourself, for what comes next is not a tale of heroes or glory. It is a journey into the machinery of pain, the architecture of agony. From the blood-slicked floors of medieval dungeons to the echoing cries of the condemned, we will follow the path of suffering carved by these infernal devices. And in doing so, perhaps we will come to understand not only the cruelty of the past, but the darkness that lingers within us all. The great empires of history were not forged by wisdom alone. They were built on fear, fear of invasion, of betrayal, of rebellion. And in their desperate grip on power, rulers often turned to torture as both sword and shield, a brutal instrument to silence opposition and cement their authority. The devices we will encounter in this story were born from such crucible times, when the line between justice and savagery blurred until it disappeared entirely. Let us step now into the vast, fractured world of medieval Europe, where kings and emperors ruled over lands simmering with unrest. In the East, the Byzantine Empire, heir to the legacy of Rome, fought a relentless battle against enemies without and within. In the West, monarchs like England's Edward I and Spain's Isabella and Ferdinand waged bloody campaigns to suppress dissent, expand their realms, and enforce religious conformity. Beneath their banners, torture was elevated from crude brutality to cold, calculated science. Consider for a moment the plight of a rebel in these times. A man or woman who dared to raise their voice against the throne or the church. Such defiance was not merely a crime, it was a challenge to the very order of the world. And the response was swift, merciless, and public. Torture was not hidden in shadows. It was paraded in the streets, displayed in town squares, performed before crowds who gathered to witness both punishment and warning. The Iron Maiden, for instance, did not arise in a vacuum. It was a product of the fevered paranoia of the Holy Roman Empire realm, fractured into countless principalities, each one a tinderbox of intrigue and ambition. The Iron Maiden promised a slow death, a lingering agony designed not just to kill but to humiliate. Its victim was locked within a metal sarcophagus, the interior lined with spikes angled to pierce flesh without striking the heart, so that death would not come swiftly. Every breath, every twitch of muscle drove the spikes deeper. The condemned died not in minutes, but in days, their torment hidden within a steel tomb as the crowd jeered and prayed. Meanwhile, in Spain, the Inquisition perfected the art of fear. Here, the rack became the favored tool, a simple device, but devastating in its design. The victim's wrists and ankles were tied with ropes, attached to rollers at either end of a wooden frame. With each turn of the wheel, the body was stretched, joints popped, muscles tore, and ligaments snapped. bones dislocated, sinews separated. The pain was unimaginable, and yet it was not the destruction of the body that most pleased the inquisitors, it was the breaking of the spirit. The rack extracted confessions, true or false. It shattered men's will, turning defiant rebels into hollow shells who would speak any words to make the agony stop. But torture was not limited to enemies of the state or church. It was wielded against anyone who posed a threat, real or imagined. Women accused of witchcraft were subjected to devices like the thumbscrew, a small but vicious tool that crushed the fingers, splintering bone and tearing nail from flesh. The strappado, favored across Europe, involved hoisting a prisoner by their bound hands behind their back, then dropping them suddenly to dislocate the shoulders. Again and again, the body was wrenched and torn, each drop a new agony. And then there was the breaking whelan invention of almost unimaginable cruelty. Used widely in France, Germany, and the Low Countries, this device transformed execution into spectacle. The condemned was tied to a large wooden wheel. With measured precision, the executioner would shatter their limbs with an iron bar, breaking bones but sparing vital organs so the victim would linger in agony. The broken body was then woven through the spokes, the wheel hoisted on a pole for all to see. Days might pass before death brought release, the victim exposed to the sun, the rain, and the scorn of the crowd. Yet perhaps the most chilling aspect of these devices was not their design, but their purpose. They were not created in moments of passion or fury. They were devised by calm minds, refined over generations, improved by men who studied anatomy and engineering to maximize suffering. The goal was not merely to kill, but to terrorize. To send a message so loud, so clear, that no one would dare defy the rulers who held the keys to these machines. Political betrayal fueled the flames of this cruelty. Within royal courts, intrigue was constant and suspicion deadly. A whispered accusation could mean the difference between a seat at the king's table and a slow death in the dungeon. Take, for example, the fate of traitors in England under the reign of Edward I. Rebels captured during his campaigns in Wales and Scotland were often subjected to the full horror of medieval justice. They might first endure torture to extract confessions or reveal co-conspirators. Then they were drawn through the streets behind horses, hanged until near death, disemboweled while still conscious, their entrails burned before their eyes. Finally, their bodies were quartered, the remains sent to distant corners of the kingdom as grim reminders of the price of treason. In the East, the Byzantine Empire, ruled at times with savage brilliance, employed blinding, castration, and mutilation as tools of both punishment and politics. Emperor Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, ordered the blinding of thousands of captured soldiers to break the will of his enemies and terrify those who might rise against him. Torture and mutilation were not personal acts of vengeance. They were statecraft, calculated and systematic. This was a world where power depended on terror, and terror was maintained through devices of torture, displayed like trophies, operated with skill, and admired for their terrible efficiency. Monarchs and popes sanctioned their use. Executioners became respected, even feared professionals, masters of their bloody craft. And the people, those who gathered to watch, were complicit, drawn by fascination, by fear, or by the grim comfort of knowing the suffering belonged to someone else. As we move forward in this dark journey, we will meet these devices in all their dreadful detail. We will step into the dungeons and public squares where they were used, hear the cries of those who endured them, and see the faces of those who ordered and inflicted the pain. And through it all, we will ask, how could such cruelty flourish, and what does it say about the world that created it? In Part 3, we will narrow our focus further. We will stand at the edge of the scaffold, beneath the looming shadow of the torture device itself. We will meet the condemned, the executioner, and the crowd. And we will witness, in unflinching detail, the machinery of suffering at work. Imagine it, a grey dawn breaking over a medieval city, its cobbled streets slick with night's dampness, its alleys filled with hushed voices and fearful glances. The bell of the great cathedral tolls slow and solemn, each deep chime a summons to witness suffering. The crowd gathers, drawn as if by an invisible hand. Merchants leave their stalls, mothers clutch their children, soldiers in worn armor take position along the square's edge. All eyes turn toward the scaffold rising like a dark altar at the heart of the city. Today, blood will spill, and it will spill in the name of justice, or so the rulers decree. At the center of this drama stands a man, broken not by guilt but by betrayal. His name is lost to time, perhaps a rebel leader, perhaps a scholar who spoke too freely, or a noble who backed the wrong side in a game of thrones. His crime? To defy those who wield power. His punishment? To be made an example of, so that none might follow in his footsteps. His fate is sealed, and the device chosen for him is one of the most feared instruments ever devised, the breaking wheel. Beside the scaffold, the executioner waits. He is no crude butcher, no drunken brute. He is a professional, a man chosen for his strength, his precision, his cold detachment. His face is hidden beneath a hood, his hands thick with calluses, his arms corded with muscle from years of wielding the iron bar that will soon shatter bone and hope alike. To him this is a task, nothing more, a job to be done, a duty to the crown or the church. He neither pities nor hates, he simply obeys. And then there is the crowd. They press forward, filling the square, climbing onto barrels and walls for a better view. Their faces are a study in contradiction, some curious, some eager, some horrified, but unable to look away. Children cling to their mothers' skirts. Old men mutter prayers. Young men shout jeers or encouragement, drunk on the spectacle of another's doom. The air hums with anticipation, thick as the mist that clings to the city's spires. The condemned is dragged from the dungeon, his body gaunt, his face pale with fear and fatigue. Chains clink with every faltering step. His garments, once rich or humble, are now rags, clinging to his thin frame. His eyes, those windows to a soul trapped between dread and defiance, scan the crowd, searching for mercy, for a friendly face, for some sign that this is all a nightmare from which he might yet wake. But there is none, only cold stares and the scaffold's looming shadow. The square itself is prepared as if for a festival. The wheel stands upright, massive and crude, its wooden frame stained from countless past torments. Nearby, the iron bar gleams dully in the weak light, a simple tool of extraordinary cruelty. Torches gutter in iron sconces, their flames fighting the morning chill. The ground beneath the scaffold is littered with straw, meant to soak up the blood that will soon flow. The scent of smoke, sweat, and damp wood fills the air. A herald steps forward, unrolling a scroll with a flourish. His voice, practiced and loud, carries over the restless murmurs of the crowd. He reads the charges: treason, heresy, rebellion, crimes that demand not just death, but a death that teaches, that terrifies. As he speaks, the executioner checks his tools, tests the weight of the bar in his hand, runs his fingers along the wheel's spokes as a craftsman might inspect his work before beginning. And all the while, the condemned listens, each word a nail driven deeper into the coffin of hope. His breathing quickens, his legs tremble, yet he does not plead. He knows it is useless. His fate was decided long before this day. The trial, the sentence, the procession, all a formality masking the brutal truth that power must demonstrate its strength, and it does so through pain. The executioner signals. Assistants move forward, rough hands pushing and pulling the prisoner onto the scaffold. He is forced down, his limbs spread and bound with coarse rope to the wheel's rim. The crowd falls silent now, a terrible quiet that seems to magnify every sound, the creak of the ropes, the labored breaths of the condemned, the soft thud as the iron bar is lifted. The air seems to hold its breath, as if the city itself recoils from what is about to unfold. The executioner raises the bar high. For a heartbeat, time stops. The crowd leans in. The condemned closes his eyes, lips moving in silent prayer or plea. And then the bar falls. A sickening crack echoes across the square as bone shatters beneath the blow. A gasp ripples through the crowd, some in shock, some in grim satisfaction. The condemned screams, a raw animal sound that cuts through the cold morning air. His body jerks, the ropes biting into his flesh. The executioner moves with deliberate care, striking again and again, working from limb to limb, breaking bones but sparing life. The wheel turns slowly, presenting new targets. Each strike is calculated, designed to prolong, not end. Blood seeps from torn flesh, darkening the wood, dripping onto the straw below. The air fills with the scent of iron, of sweat, of fear. The condemned's cries weaken, turning to whimpers, then silence as shock claims him. But the execution continues, relentless, methodical. The shattered limbs are woven through the spokes, the broken body displayed as a grotesque tapestry of pain. The wheel is hoisted upright, a grim standard planted at the square's center. The crowd gazes upon it, some with horror, others with the satisfaction of justice served. And still, the condemned clings to life. That, after all, is the design. The breaking wheel is not meant to kill swiftly. It is meant to transform the human body into a warninga, reminder of the cost of defiance. Days may pass before death brings release. Birds will gather, the sun will bake the flesh, the rain will wash the blood away, but the memory will linger, burned into the minds of all who witnessed. In this moment, we see not just a man's suffering, but an empire's message written in blood and bone. The device, the executioner, the crowdal part of a grim theater, staged to preserve power. And as the people turn away, as the square empties and the city resumes its life, the wheel remains, a monument to cruelty, a tool of terror, and a reminder that in this age, mercy is as rare as rebellion is deadly. As our journey continues in Part 4, we will step closer still. We will feel the heat of the brazen bull, hear the cries of the Strapado's victims, and see through the eyes of those condemned to the Iron Maiden. The machinery of suffering will turn, and we will bear witness to every brutal detail. The wheel still turns in our minds, its spokes woven with shattered limbs, its timber slick with blood. But as night falls over the city and the crowd's murmurs fade into silence, the machinery of suffering does not rest. In the shadows of stone fortresses and beneath cathedral crypts, other devices await their victims. Their forms are crude, yet ingenious, their purpose singular, to break the body, to unmake the soul. Tonight, we step into the hidden chambers where pain is crafted into our tanned horror, is given shape in iron and flame. Picture the brazen bull, a monstrous sculpture forged of gleaming brass, shaped like a mighty beast, its hollow belly waiting to receive the condemned. The fire is kindled beneath its belly, at first a whispering flame that licks at the metal's underside. The condemned is dragged forward, stripped, beaten, trembling with terror. His skin glistens with sweat, his eyes wide with disbelief as he beholds his fate. The door in the bull's side opens with a groan of ancient hinges. The interior is slick with the residue of past agonies, the coppery tang of old blood mingling with the sour stink of burnt flesh. The victim is shoved inside, the door slammed shut and bolted tight. Darkness envelops him, the air is already stifling. Then the fire roars to life, the flames dancing hungrily along the bull's belly, the heat rising, searing, suffocating. Inside, the condemned's screams begin as terrified cries and rise to a crescendo of agony as the brass grows hot. The metal scorches his skin, blisters forming, bursting, flesh searing to bone. But the true horror lies in the bull's design tubes and chambers within its head that transform the screams into the bellowing roar of the beast, so that to the crowd outside it seems the bull itself is alive, enraged, possessed. The executioners stoke the fire, and the bull roars louder, a monstrous symphony of man and metal, of suffering made spectacle. As the victim burns, the scent of roasting flesh fills the air, sickly, sweet, nauseating. Smoke curls from the bull's nostrils. The body within thrashes, convulses, then weakens, until at last, mercifully, the cries fall silent. The brass bull cools in the night air, its belly smeared with the charred remnants of another soul claimed by flame. The ashes are swept away, the bull made ready for its next victim. Elsewhere, in a dungeon carved deep beneath a castle's foundations, the Strapado claims its prey. The condemned is dragged before the device, wrists bound tightly behind his back, arms wrenched upward until his shoulders strain, muscles screaming. The rope passes through a pulley fixed to the ceiling, a weight or the executioner's own strength providing the lift. With a sudden jerk, the victim is hoisted from the ground, the full weight of his body suspended by his disjointed shoulders. The pop of bone is audible, sickening in its clarity. The victim cries out, a sound of raw, primal anguish. But the torment does not end there. The executioner lets the rope fall suddenly, the body plunging toward the stone floor, only to be halted inches above it by the brutal pull of the rope. The shock tears at the joints, dislocates the shoulders, sends lightning bolts of pain through every nerve. The process repeats, hoisted, dropped, hoisted again, each cycle ripping the body further apart. The dungeon reeks of damp stone, of sweat, of fear. The condemned gasps, sobs, pleads for mercy that will not come. Torches flicker, casting monstrous shadows on the walls, grotesque echoes of the suffering man, his form twisted, broken, unrecognizable. The strappado does not kill. That is not its purpose. It leaves the victim alive, shattered in body and spirit, a living warning to all who would defy those in power. And then the Iron Maiden, the most infamous of all. A device shrouded in myth, yet real enough to haunt the darkest corners of history. The maiden stands tall, a steel figure, its outer form that of a woman cloaked in robes of metal. But it is the inside that terrifies, a forest of spikes, carefully placed to pierce flesh without striking the heart or vital organs. The condemned is forced inside, the door swung shut with agonizing slowness. Each spike finds its mark: thigh, arm, shoulder, belly, driving deep but sparing life. The victim is left upright, impaled yet breathing, every movement driving the spikes deeper. The Iron Maiden silences its prisoner. The steel muffles the cries, the pain swallowed by the tomb that inflicts it. The air inside grows foul, heavy with the stink of blood, sweat, and terror. Darkness presses in, and with it despair. Hours, perhaps days, pass before death comes. The spikes ensure that every breath, every twitch is agony. And when at last the door is opened, what remains is not a man or woman, but a ruin of flesh and bone. These devices share a purpose: to inflict not just physical pain, but psychological ruin. They turn the act of execution into a spectacle, a lesson, a theater of suffering designed to remind all who see, hear, or smell it that defiance leads only to ruin. The crowds that gather are complicit, their faces lit by firelight, their voices raised in jeers or prayers. They witness the breaking of bodies and souls, and in doing so, their own fear is kindled, their obedience assured. As dawn breaks over the city once more, the remnants of the night's work linger. Ashes from the bull's belly drift on the breeze. The wheel still stands, its grisly cargo picked at by carrion birds. The dungeon falls silent, its echoes of agony fading into memory. And yet, the message is clear. Power is maintained not by justice, but by terror. The devices of torture are tools in this grim equation, their design refined to ensure that fear outlives the moment of pain. In our final chapter, we will trace the aftermath of these horrors. We will see how the legacy of these devices shaped empires, scarred cultures, and cast shadows that reach even into our modern world. The machinery of suffering may have been dismantled, but its echoes still haunt us. Join us for Part 5, where we confront the long, dark legacy of the world's most feared torture devices. The fires have burned low, the iron has cooled, the screams have faded into silence. And yet, the devices remain not in wood or steel, perhaps, but in memory, in legend, in the dark corners of our shared history. The breaking wheel, the brazen bull, the Iron Maiden, the strapadol, these and more have left scars not just on the bodies they mangled, but on the world itself. Their legacy is one of fear, of cruelty made law, of terror wielded as a tool of power. And their shadow stretches long, even into our present age. Consider the empires that built their thrones upon these instruments of torment. The rulers who sanctioned their use did so not out of madness or bloodlust alone, but as part of a deliberate strategy, cold, brutal logic. Pain became policy, suffering became spectacle. The Iron Maiden, standing grim and silent in a town square, spoke more loudly than any royal edict. The brazen bull, its roar echoing across a city's walls, silenced dissent more effectively than 1,000 soldiers. The breaking wheel, raised high above the heads of the crowd, declared in no uncertain terms, "This is the price of defiance." In medieval Europe, torture served not only as punishment, but as performance. It reminded subjects that power was absolute, that rebellion was futile, that the king or the church could reach into any home, any heart, and make it stop beating in the most excruciating way imaginable. And so, people learned to obey not out of loyalty, but out of terror. Justice became synonymous with pain, authority with cruelty, and though the devices themselves may have rusted away, that lesson endured. The psychological impact of these machines was as potent as the physical. Whole populations lived under their shadow. Children grew up with the stories whispered by elders: the wheel that broke men like kindling, the iron maiden that swallowed the disobedient whole. Markets, festivals, holy daysal could be interrupted by the grim procession of the condemned toward the scaffold or the square. Torture was part of life, as ordinary as taxes or plague. But in time, the world began to change. The Enlightenment dawned, bringing with it new ideas about justice, human dignity, and the role of the state. Philosophers and reformers began to question the morality of torture, its effectiveness, and its place in civilized society. Cesare Beccaria, in his On Crimes and Punishments, denounced torture as barbaric, ineffective, and morally bankrupt. Across Europe, rulers began to listen. Slowly, reluctantly, the great engines of suffering were dismantled. The public executions ceased. The torture chambers fell silent. The devices were broken apart, thrown into rivers, or displayed in museums as relics of a darker age. And yet, the spirit of these devices, the logic that created them, never truly died. Modern history is stained with echoes of the Iron Maiden and the rack. In the 20th century, regimes across the globe revived torture under new names, new methods, but with the same goal: to break the body, to control the mind, to rule through fear. From the secret prisons of dictatorships to the black sites of clandestine wars, the machinery of pain was reinvented, adapted to new times, new technologies, but driven by the same darkness that forged the torture devices of old. Even today, the legacy of these instruments haunts us. We see it in the debates over human rights, in the scars carried by survivors of modern torture, in the way fear is still used as a tool of governance. The breaking wheel may no longer stand in the town square, but the idea that terror can be used to control has never left us. The Iron Maiden may be a museum piece, but the impulse to silence descent through suffering lives on in subtler, but no less cruel forms. And what of those who designed and operated these devices? The executioners, the torturers, the engineers of agony. History has often painted them as monsters, and in many ways they were. But they were also products of their time tools themselves, forged by the same systems of power and fear that created the devices they wielded. Their hands held the iron bar, but behind them stood kings, popes, councils, and crowds that demanded the breaking of bodies to preserve their order. Perhaps the most chilling legacy of these torture devices is what they reveal about us, the spectators. The crowd that gathered in the square to watch the wheel turn, that cheered as the bull roared, that prayed as the strappado dislocated another set of shoulders. For torture was not hidden, it was performed. And in that performance, ordinary people found fascination, satisfaction, and fear. The devices worked not only on the condemned, but on all who witnessed. They reminded every man, woman, and child of their place in the hierarchy of power and of the agony that awaited those who forgot it. Today, these instruments of pain stand silent in museums, their spikes dulled, their iron rusted, their wood splintered by time, but their stories endure. They serve as grim warnings, reminders of what happens when cruelty is codified, when fear replaces justice, when the machinery of the state turns against its own people. And as we gaze upon them, whether in dusty exhibits or haunting illustrations, we are called to ask ourselves, how far have we truly come? And how easily might we return to the darkness? This concludes our journey through history's most feared torture devices. We have walked the blood-slick floors of dungeons, stood beneath the gallows, and stared into the hollow eyes of the Iron Maiden. We have heard the roar of the brazen bull, the crack of bone beneath the wheel, the sickening pop of the strappado. And through it all we have seen how pain was transformed into power and suffering into spectacle. But our exploration of dark history does not end here. In our next video, we will delve into another chapter of humanity's shadowed past. We will uncover the secret assassins of ancient Persia, or perhaps the cursed treasures that brought empires to ruin. The darkness runs deep, and together we will shine a light into its most hidden corners. If you found this journey as haunting as it was enlightening, make sure to subscribe, share, and join us for the next tale from the abyss of history. Until then, remember, the past is never truly dead. Its shadows are all around us, if only we dare to look.